A leaked US-Iran document is now raising one explosive question. Did President Donald Trump just give Tehran a path to sanctions relief, oil exports, and a $300 billion investment lifeline? That is the political fight breaking out tonight after details of a reported memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran became public. The document is not the final deal, but according to the leaked text, it could create the road toward a much larger agreement within 60 days, and the stakes are enormous. The framework reportedly includes a wider end to the war, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, waivers connected to Iranian oil exports, the possible release of frozen Iranian assets, a path toward removing sanctions, and a proposed $300 billion private investment fund for Iran's economic development. The White House can call this diplomacy, Tehran can call it victory, Israel can call it a warning, and critics in Washington can call it a dangerous concession. But the most important part may be this: the document is leaked, the deal is unfinished, and the political damage has already begun. According to the leaked material, Saudi Arabia's Al Arabiya was among the first outlets to obtain the text of the memorandum. The document reportedly contains 14 points, and one of the most controversial sections is the part that says the United States would help facilitate a $300 billion fund for private investment in Iran. That number is now at the center of the story, because President Trump has publicly pushed back against claims that the deal includes a $300 billion benefit for Iran. But according to the leaked text and the reporting around it, the figure does appear in the framework. The question is what kind of $300 billion it is. The reporting describes it not as a direct US government payment and not as a compensation package from Washington to Tehran, but as a private investment vehicle. That distinction matters legally and politically. But for critics of the deal, the result may still look the same. Iran could receive a huge economic opening after months of war, sanctions, pressure, and regional escalation. The document was reportedly signed electronically by President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance on behalf of the United States. On the Iranian side, it was reportedly signed by Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Iran's parliament. That detail is unusual. On the American side, the reported signatories are the President and Vice President. On the Iranian side, the signatory is not the President, but the Parliament Speaker. Ghalibaf is a powerful figure inside Iran's political system, but the structure of the signatures is still notable. The memorandum is also reportedly expected to be signed in person in Switzerland on Friday. So, what exactly is inside it? Point 1 reportedly says that Iran and the United States, together with their allies in the current war, declare an immediate and permanent end to the war on all fronts once the memorandum is signed. That includes Lebanon. That one word matters. Lebanon being mentioned in the first point shows that this is not being treated as a narrow US-Iran document. It is being treated as a regional framework. The provision also says both sides would commit, from that point forward, to refrain from the threat or use of force against each other. The final agreement would then confirm that article, along with the remaining provisions. So, the opening point of the document is not only about ending direct hostilities, it is about trying to freeze a wider conflict. Point 2 reportedly says Iran and the United States commit to respecting each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It also says both sides agree to refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs. That language is standard diplomatic language, but in the US-Iran relationship, it is anything but simple. For decades, both countries have accused each other of interference, pressure, destabilization, and hostile action. So if this language becomes part of a final agreement, it would mark a major shift in tone, even before the harder enforcement questions are answered. Point 3 says Iran and the United States commit to negotiating and reaching a final agreement within a maximum period of 60 days. That period can be extended by mutual consent, and that is a key detail. This is not the final agreement. It is a memorandum of understanding designed to create the path toward a final agreement. But some parts of the memorandum appear to create immediate commitments before the final deal is actually complete. That makes the agreement politically sensitive. Because the administration can present it as a breakthrough, Iran can present it as proof that Washington had to negotiate, but critics can argue that Tehran is being given major benefits before the most difficult issues are resolved. The 60-day deadline also leaves room for this process to continue. If both sides agree, the negotiations can be extended. That means this could move beyond one deadline, beyond one signing ceremony, and possibly through a much longer political process. Point 4 reportedly says that immediately after the memorandum is signed, the United States will lift the naval blockade and prevent interference or obstruction against Iran. It also says traffic must be restored to full capacity within a maximum of 30 days. Ship traffic is supposed to return to a level proportional to Iran's pre-war volume. The United States also commits to withdrawing its forces from surrounding areas within 30 days after the final agreement. This is one of the most important parts of the document because it connects the diplomatic agreement directly to military posture and shipping routes. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important energy choke points in the world. Any disruption there can affect oil markets, shipping insurance, global supply chains, and fuel costs far beyond the Middle East. So when the document talks about restoring traffic, it is not just a regional issue. It is a global economic issue. Point 5 reportedly says that once the memorandum is signed, Iran will immediately take steps to ensure the movement of merchant ships from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and from the Sea of Oman back to the Persian Gulf. That movement is supposed to resume within 30 days, returning to pre-war volume. The text also refers to the need to remove technical obstacles and neutralize mines. In plain terms, the blockade would open, ships would be able to move, the pressure on the Strait of Hormuz would ease. But the next point is where the agreement becomes even more controversial. The United States reportedly commits, together with its regional partners, to create a comprehensive plan agreed by both parties for the rehabilitation and economic development of Iran. That plan would ensure financing of at least $300 billion. The implementation mechanism would be developed as part of the final agreement within 60 days. That is the section now driving the political firestorm, because $300 billion is not a small technical detail. It is the kind of number that changes the way the agreement is understood. Supporters can argue the fund would create an economic incentive for peace. Critics can argue it rewards Tehran after conflict. Iran can argue it extracted a major concession from Washington, and the Trump administration can argue that this is not American taxpayer compensation, but private investment structured to support a broader deal. Point 7 reportedly says the United States commits to ending all types of sanctions currently facing Iran on a schedule to be agreed as part of the final agreement. That includes United Nations Security Council resolutions, sanctions connected to the Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and unilateral sanctions. It also includes both primary and secondary sanctions. In other words, the framework points toward the eventual removal of sanctions from multiple levels. That would be a major win for Iran. Sanctions have been one of Washington's strongest tools against Tehran for years. Removing them would change Iran's access to trade, finance, energy markets, and international capital. But again, the schedule for that removal would be negotiated as part of the final agreement. So the text opens the door. It does not yet show the full path. Point 8 reportedly says Iran reiterates that it will never produce nuclear weapons. Iran and the United States also agree that the fate of enriched material and other mutually agreed nuclear-related issues, including Iran's nuclear needs, will be addressed in a final agreement. The final agreement would confirm that provision. This is another major point of tension. Iran is saying it will not produce nuclear weapons, but the language appears to leave the harder technical questions for later. That includes the fate of enriched material. It also includes Iran's future nuclear needs. That means the framework may allow Iran to continue arguing that it can maintain some level of nuclear program as long as it does not produce nuclear weapons. That is very different from the position many Iran hawks in Washington and Israel have demanded. They have wanted strict limits, deep dismantlement, and clear removal of Iran's ability to move toward a bomb. So this part of the text is likely to become one of the most controversial parts of the entire deal. The document also reportedly says that while the final agreement is pending, both sides will maintain the status quo. Iran would maintain the status quo in its nuclear program. The United States would not impose new sanctions on Iran, and the United States would not strengthen its forces in the region. That means both sides would be expected to freeze certain actions while talks continue. But the document then goes further. It reportedly says that immediately after the memorandum is signed and until sanctions are lifted, the US Treasury will issue waivers for exports of Iranian crude oil, petrochemical products, and related derivatives. Those waivers would also cover connected services, including banking, insurance, transportation, and other related areas. That is a major economic opening. If Iranian oil exports are allowed under waivers, and if banking, insurance, and transportation services are also covered, then Iran gets access to real economic movement before the final deal is fully completed. That is why critics will focus heavily on timing. They will ask why Iran should receive export waivers and economic relief while the nuclear questions remain unresolved. Supporters will answer that incentives are needed to keep Iran at the negotiating table and keep the wider ceasefire alive. Point 11 reportedly says that in light of progress toward a final agreement, frozen or restricted Iranian funds and assets will be released and made fully available. The text says those funds, whether held in a master account or transferred, would be used for any final beneficiary payment determined by the Central Bank of Iran. It also says the funds would be fully available for use. The United States would undertake to issue the necessary permits and licenses for that process. That is another politically explosive section. Frozen Iranian assets have long been a major point of leverage. If they are released, even conditionally, that would be another significant benefit for Tehran. Point 12 says Iran and the United States agree that an implementation mechanism will be established. That mechanism would oversee the successful implementation of the final agreement and future commitments. Point 13 reportedly says that after the memorandum is signed and after Iran receives assurances about the start and implementation of Articles 4, 5, 10, and 11, the two sides will enter negotiations for a final agreement only on the remaining articles. That means some provisions are being treated as immediate or early commitments, while the rest will be negotiated later. The final agreement would then be approved through a binding resolution at the United Nations Security Council. That structure is important, because if some benefits begin early and the most difficult issues are pushed into later talks, the agreement becomes vulnerable to political attack. That is exactly what is happening now. According to the reporting cited in the transcript, the $300 billion private fund is designed to trigger investment into Iran. More than half of that amount has reportedly already been committed by parties familiar with the deal. That would mean more than $150 billion has already been committed. So when people deny that the $300 billion figure exists, the leaked text and the reporting around it say otherwise. But again, the crucial distinction is this. The fund is reportedly not a direct US government compensation package. It is not described as a Persian Gulf aid program. It is described as a private investment vehicle with capital commitments from companies and financial actors across the Gulf, Asia, the United States, Africa, and Latin America. No government is reportedly directly involved. That raises several unanswered questions. Which companies are involved? Which financial institutions are being asked to participate? How binding are these commitments? What protections would those investors receive? And how much of the plan depends on sanctions relief actually happening? The stated idea is not to pay Iran for the war. The idea is to create an economic framework that gives all sides a stake in preserving a future agreement. If confirmed, that would represent a significant shift in US strategy. Instead of relying only on sanctions, isolation, and military pressure, the framework would move toward investment and economic integration as tools of regional stability. But Israel is not treating this as a routine diplomatic development. According to Israel's Channel 12, Israeli officials requested to see the text of the Memorandum of Understanding, but were denied by their US counterparts. That claim is politically serious. US officials had reportedly given Israeli decision-makers assurances that certain preconditions related to Iran's nuclear program were definitely included in the deal. Now, the leaked text has created questions about exactly what those assurances meant. This places Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a difficult position. For years, Netanyahu has argued that diplomacy with Iran is dangerous unless it imposes strict limits on Tehran's nuclear program and regional power. But this reported framework may do something different. It may pause the war, reopen shipping, allow oil exports under waivers, move towards sanctions relief, and create an investment path for Iran, while leaving some of the hardest nuclear issues for the final agreement. That is why Netanyahu and his allies may see this as a threat, not only because of Iran, but because Washington may now be negotiating a deal that Israel does not fully control. There is also growing criticism of Netanyahu's own role. The argument from some commentators is that Netanyahu played on Trump's instincts to help bring the United States into the conflict, but now Trump may be trying to end the war on terms Netanyahu does not like. If that is the case, Netanyahu may have helped create a conflict that he can no longer direct. His legal and political situation is also under pressure. Netanyahu's criminal trial continues. During cross-examination, he reportedly erupted at prosecutor Yonatan Tadmor, pounding the table and accusing the process of being a police state and political persecution. He was confronted with inconsistencies in his accounts of certain events. He also accused investigators of using spyware as part of a campaign to topple a prime minister. Judge Rivka Friedman-Feldman reportedly tried repeatedly to calm him down, but Netanyahu continued shouting in the courtroom. He told the judges they would spend every day in court over what he called disgraceful treatment. At the same time, Trump's approval inside Israel has reportedly shifted dramatically. According to polling cited in the transcript, Trump was at plus 23 in Israel 3 weeks earlier. Now, he is reportedly at net negative 23. That is a 46-point swing. Netanyahu's Likud party has also reportedly shelved a planned campaign highlighting Netanyahu's relationship with Donald Trump. That is a remarkable change. For years, Netanyahu's relationship with Trump was treated as a major political advantage. Now it may be politically risky. The situation is also being complicated by claims from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC is claiming Israel has committed close to 100 violations of the ceasefire over the past 48 hours. The IRGC is also warning the United States that it must control Netanyahu, or Iran will consider the ceasefire broken. That is a direct message to Washington. Iran is not only saying Israel is the problem, it is saying the United States is responsible for restraining Israel. That puts Trump in a difficult position. If he pushes Netanyahu too hard, he risks angering pro-Israel forces inside his own coalition. If he does not restrain Israel, the ceasefire could collapse and Iran could accuse the United States of bad faith. Earlier today, Trump made a striking statement about the US-Israel relationship. He said that without the United States, there would be no Israel. He also said that without him, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what he did. Trump said he has had a great relationship with Bibi, but added that now Bibi has to adjust. That statement suggests Trump believes he has leverage over Netanyahu. But then Trump's own ambassador, Mike Huckabee, appeared to deliver a very different message. Huckabee said it is also his job to represent the importance of Israel to the United States. He said Israel's heritage is not only Israel's heritage, but also the heritage of the United States. He then said that without Israel and without the Jewish Foundation, there would not be an America. That is almost the opposite message. Trump's message was that Israel depends on the United States. Huckabee's message was that the United States is deeply indebted to Israel's spiritual and historical foundation. That split shows the tension inside Trump's own political world. One side wants to tell Israel that Washington is in charge. Another side wants to reassure Israel that America remains bound to it at the deepest level. And that is why this agreement is creating pressure inside the Trump administration, not only outside it. The New York Post has also criticized Trump over the reported deal. The paper argued that Trump told Iranian protesters help was on the way, but that the peace deal now leaves the Iranian regime more powerful than ever. According to the Post, Iranian dissidents who stood against the regime are frustrated and angry as details emerge about the agreement between Washington and Tehran. That criticism matters because it is not coming only from Democrats or anti-Trump voices. It is coming from a Murdoch-owned outlet that often speaks to conservative audiences. So Trump is now facing criticism from several directions at once. Iran may present the framework as a victory. Israel may see it as a threat. Iranian dissidents may feel abandoned. Hawks in Washington may say the agreement is weak, and Trump is trying to defend the deal while denying the most damaging interpretation of it. The larger point is this. If this agreement prevents more war, that matters. The United States should not be pulled deeper into another catastrophic conflict in the Middle East, and if the memorandum holds, it could reduce the risk of wider escalation. But compared with the Obama-era Iran deal, critics argue this framework appears weaker. They say it has fewer clear restrictions, less immediate clarity, and weaker enforcement mechanisms. They also argue that the most important nuclear questions are being left for later. Supporters will respond that the priority right now is to stop the fighting, reopen shipping, stabilize the region, and create enough incentive for a final agreement. That is the central debate. Is this a smart diplomatic off-ramp, or is it a major concession to Iran? Is Trump ending a war, or is he giving Tehran too much to get a ceasefire? Those questions will define the next 60 days. The reported terms include a path to end hostilities, reopen major shipping routes, lift the naval blockade, allow Iranian oil exports under waivers, release restricted Iranian assets, move toward ending sanctions, and create a $300 billion private investment framework for Iran. But the unresolved questions are just as important. What happens to Iran's enriched material? How much of Iran's nuclear program remains? Who verifies compliance? What happens if Israel continues military action? Which companies are actually committing funds? What happens if Iran or Israel is accused of violating the ceasefire? How much of this agreement is already binding, and how much still depends on a final deal? Those are not small details. They will determine whether this framework becomes a real diplomatic breakthrough or another temporary pause before the next crisis. For now, the leaked memorandum shows one thing clearly. Washington, Tehran, and Tel Aviv are no longer telling the same story. Trump wants to present the framework as strength. Iran wants to present it as recognition. Israel is treating it as a warning, and critics are already calling it a major mistake. The document is leaked. The deal is unfinished, but the political damage has already begun. That is where things stand tonight. The next major moment is expected when the memorandum is signed in person in Switzerland. Until then, the battle over what this deal really means is already underway, and the world will be watching not only what Trump says, but what Iran does, what Israel does, and whether this fragile framework can survive the pressure now building around it.